Hello. Today, I'm going to be beginning to read, another very long chapter in the book Belonging to Life by Mary O'Malley, The Journey to Awakening. This is a book that I, as the Good Shepherd, Natalie, have read many times, and it continues to amaze me that whenever we go back to something in life that we've already read or learned or seen or done, our perception continues to change, as well as for persons, when you begin to awaken, your perception begins to diminish because you begin to start feeling more from your soul than thinking without thinking with your mind. My name is Natalie. I'm the Good Shepherd here on our small hobby farm. Everybody's quiet right now, and it's going to be a beautiful day. Still got the scarf on and the jean jacket, but there's a cool breeze. It's going to be about, I think, 70 degrees here today in central North Carolina. Chapter 4, Moving Beyond Struggle. The innocent mistake. The innocent mistake that keeps us caught in our own particular style of ignorance, unkindness, and shut-downness is that we are never encouraged to see clearly what is, with gentleness. Instead, there's a kind of basic misunderstanding that we should try to be better than we already are, that we should try to improve ourselves, that we should try to get away from painful things, and that if we could just learn to get away from the painful things, then we would be happy. This is the innocent, naive misunderstanding that we all share. Meditation is about seeing clearly the body we have, the mind we have, the domestic situation that we have, the job that we have, and the people who are in our lives. It's about seeing how we react to all these things. It's seeing our emotions and thoughts just as they are right now, in this very moment, in this very room, on this very seat. It's about not trying to make them go away, not trying to become better than we are, but just seeing clearly with precision and gentleness. The problem is that the desire to change is fundamentally a form of aggression towards yourself. The other problem is that our hang-ups, unfortunately or fortunately, contain our wealth. Pema Chodron. In the seeing is the movement. Meditation is anchoring your boat so you don't go out with the tides. Joan Boriensko. In my mid-20s, I was hospitalized during a stay in Europe. My life had come crashing down around me. A week before I entered the hospital, I was told that if I didn't stop all of the destructive behaviors I was engaging in, I only had 5 months to live. My response was that I knew I would die. Everything I had tried to make me better had failed, driving me deeper into a labyrinth of struggle. Drugs, alcohol, and overeating were the only things that numbed me enough that I didn't have to feel an almost constant, debilitating shame, and I wasn't willing to give them up. A year later, on the day I arrived home from Europe, I tried to take my life, only to have my stomach pumped out in time. 2 other attempts at suicide also failed, driving me deeper into the world of self-hatred and despair. Then, one gentle spring weekend, my mother gave me the gift of a workshop with Joel Kramer. He was a hatha yoga teacher who taught much more than physical postures. He taught the art of seeing what is. As he talked about the power of awareness, I felt a ray of sunshine flooding the dark and dreary labyrinth I had lived in for so long. For a brief moment, I recognized that I was awareness itself. I was that which sees the story that moves through my mind all day long, rather than the story itself. I could also see that the path I had been taking, constantly trying to make myself different or better than I felt I was, would not take me beyond struggle. For moments, I connected with a clarity and peace greater than anything I had ever consciously known. The next time Joel came to town, I took a tape recorder and recorded the whole weekend. I then went home and transcribed every word. I still couldn't hold on to whatever it was that brought forth the clarity and peace. The words and concepts would seep through my consciousness as quickly as water through sand. After having spent a number of weekends with him, I had distilled what I was hearing down to a few words. I went up to him and said, "What I'm hearing is, in the seeing is the movement. It's not in the fixing, changing, and rearranging of all the states of mind and body we so try to control. The healing is in the seeing, in the ability to relate to them rather than from them." He smiled as he said yes. I went on to say, it seems that the whole sentence should be, in the seeing is the movement, until the observer and observed become one. What does that mean? With a twinkle in his eyes, he said, go find out. This is what this book is about, experiencing what it means when he says the observer and the observed become one. It is about discovering the experience of having one's mind, body, and heart all in the same place, all at the same time. This is not most people's experience of life. Lost inside a story about life, cut off from the living experience, get rid of the parts we don't like, and we try to find and nail down the parts that we do. That is what a good deal of our energy is spent on in manipulating the story. But at our essence is something that lies beyond the story, beyond the constantly wanting and fearing mind. The peace we long for is already here right now. We don't need to try to get to it. We need to see the story that covers it the way a fog bank hides the harbor. Every moment of recognizing what is happening in the mind, without falling into identification with it, is a moment of not being caught in the story, a moment of freedom. These moments then become the movement that takes us beyond the constant struggle that we live in most of the time, and thus allows us to be fully alive. Notice that with all of these shifts, there is something that is steady and constant, something that can perceive what is happening. It can tell the difference between a thought, an emotion, a sensation, a fantasy, or a memory. This is awareness, the ability to see what is. Most of the time, our attention is focused on our experiences, enmeshed in the world of thoughts, feelings and sensations as they appear and disappear in our lives. Freedom comes when we can watch our experience rather than being lost in it. The summer of 1996, I broke my ankle while hiking with my son. At the same time, my mother was approaching her death in a city 6 hours away from me. I had spent the last few months traveling back and forth, becoming intimately involved with my mother's process. Slow progress with my ankle made it seem difficult or even impossible for me to be with her, and I began to struggle with what was happening. Also, with little exercise, I felt like a toilet that hadn't been flushed. One morning, I woke into the labyrinth of struggle, completely lost in a fit of resistance. As I sat down for my quiet time, my mind said, oh good, at least there will be a little peace now. It was focused on, let's get out of this state and into a better one. And of course it didn't work. Trying to get into peace only created more grasping resistance and fear. I was so caught in struggle that I had totally forgotten about paying attention. Finally, awareness kicked in. What is? It asked. In other words, what is happening here? In a flash, my attention moved out of identification with my spinning and resisting thoughts, and I became deeply curious. In response to the question, what is the experience of my life right now? I could see that my mind was caught in wanting things to be different than they are. In asking the question, what is, I began to relate to the thoughts in my head rather than being lost in them. It was like I had been in a whirling washing machine, and all of a sudden I was standing outside of it, watching the clothes being tossed around. As I stayed with the question, what is, I began to feel more spacious around what was happening. As my field of awareness opened, I connected with the overall experience of not feeling well. I was able to intimately feel, without fear and judgment, the subtle flu-like feelings all over my body. As my attention became more focused, I made contact with the tightness in my solar plexus, the fist of resistance. As I settled there, I could then see, without falling into them, the voices that fueled this contraction in my belly. I listened to the song of grief that came from not being able to be there for my mother, the deep chant of fear that she would die before I saw her again, and the litany of rage that spoke of how seemingly unfair life can be at times. Rather than identifying with these voices, I made space for them, remembering that they were all a part of the passing show of my story. Slowly, my belly began to soften and my heart opened. I realized that the roots of these feelings went much deeper than the experience of not being able to be with my mother. The grief and rage were core support beams in the labyrinth of my story. By relating to them rather than being lost in them, I began to find the place beyond the story. With great joy, I could now use attention to watch the struggle in my mind and not identify with it. Everything began to come back into balance. My mind became quieter, my body felt better, and my heart trusted that I would again be with my mother exactly when I was supposed to be. I can't believe this whole section here. This is verbatim my life right now. How I've been feeling for my own mother and not having seen her in 2 years now, and yet we talk every day on the phone, but still, I share this every time I do one of my little audiobook readings, that every book I've been reading for many years now, whenever I read a chapter, my life, it happened like just recently. It's not that I read these books and then I create that to happen in my life. It already happened, and then the next day I read. It's bizarre. All right. Of course, when an urgent thought would again catch my attention, off I would go, and that thought would flow into another, and then another, and pretty soon I would wind my way back into struggle again. But then the discomfort of the struggle would awaken me again. Re-asking the question, what is? Would take me back into keen curiosity about what my story was doing and into a sense of merciful spaciousness. For the rest of my quiet time, I went back and forth, identifying with the struggle, waking up to what is, and stabilizing in deep curiosity, only to become caught in the mind again. But every time I became caught in the whirlwind of the story, I was able to step back into this awareness by asking what is, and then simply watch the thoughts and feelings that were now flowing through me. And as I did so, everything became lighter and clearer. Why are moments of seeing what is, rather than identifying with it, so powerful? Because it is awareness in action. We are not the story in our minds. We are awareness itself. This is the spacious field of our true nature. When we focus this awareness, it becomes attention, the ability to be present and deeply curious about exactly what is right now, rather than being lost in it. In the past, we have used struggle to try to get out of struggle, only to find ourselves still enmeshed. Attention is the doorway out of this labyrinth of the mind. It is the only activity that can take us beyond our story, because it is the only place that is bigger than the struggles in our mind, including the struggle to become free. It doesn't fight with what is, nor does it wish to be any different. It is simply willing to see it. Through attention, we discover more and more moments of being immediately with life. We also become able to see with great compassion and deep curiosity the story that takes us away. The more we see the story, the more it thins like the morning fog that is touched by the warm rays of the sun. And the more it thins, the more we are here. And the more we are here, the more we can see the story. Slowly and surely, we become bigger than the labyrinth of the struggling mind and know the breathtaking joy of belonging to life. We have been exploring step by step the ability to be awake. We are now ready to shine the light of our attention on all of the stories in our heads. As long as we are identified with the conversation in our minds, we will be unable to see what we think of as ourselves is simple a story. It is a story that is woven out of our experiences and is full of ideas about ourselves and about life, keeping us away from truly experiencing life itself. To be able to see the story gives us great freedom. Many years ago, I had an experience that clearly highlights the healing that comes from being able to see the conversation in our heads. I was a single parent for most of the time my children were growing up. We lived very simply, and at times even less than that. I had received a $10,000 settlement, more money than I had ever seen up to that point in my life. The temptation was to spend it on so many things I felt we needed, but I also knew I had no backup set aside for emergencies. Long-term goals won out, and I decided I should invest it. Having never had money, I didn't have a clue about what to do, so I called a friend, and she connected me with her financial advisor. After explaining my financial situation, he said he had just the thing for me. After a few days, a stack of official papers arrived with a note saying that the investment would take care of itself for 5 years, and then I would need to invest $2,000 every year thereafter. Being a fairly trusting individual and also being highly uneducated around money, I filed it away. 4.5 years later, I called him only to find out that he had moved to Mexico. The first feelings of trepidation began to appear. Tracking down the parent company, I discovered that what I had thought I had invested in and what really happened were two different things. On my way to a meeting with a new financial advisor, I was still operating on the belief that I could retrieve a good deal of my initial investment, so my mind was fairly quiet. It was one of those breathtakingly beautiful winter days in the Northwest where the first hints of spring were in the air. Crocuses were appearing, heralding the soon-to-arrive celebration of all the other spring blossoms. On the drive downtown, I was either fully here or was able to easily return, being present with the garage attendant and with the people in the elevator. As I got off on the 40th floor, I was greeted by the view of Puget Sound. The Olympic Mountains were pristine white with snow, framed by the exquisite blue of both sky and water, and I was very glad to be alive. When I left his office an hour later, instead of being present, I was caught in the web of my story. He not only told me that I would be lucky to get back a fraction of my investment, but he also said that the original advisor had pocketed a $10,000 commission. Lost in my story of helplessness, I felt violated, abused, used, stupid, inept, and enraged. Needless to say, I didn't notice the view on the way out of his office, nor could I connect with anyone on the elevators and escalators as I descended to the garage. I had a number of choices of what to do with this state of mind that so thoroughly had me caught in its grip. I could try to rise above it, thinking positive thoughts. I could ignore it by either denying or numbing. I did think briefly about stopping and getting something to eat, even though I was not physically hungry. I could stay lost in it, caught in the whirlpool of my mind, or I could become curious about it. Having cultivated deep curiosity about the unfolding of my life, it didn't take very long before curiosity cut through the upheaval. The first thing that captured my attention when I asked the question, "What is?" was a sharp pain in my wrist. My whole body had become contracted, reflecting the struggle in my mind, and I was gripping the steering wheel tightly. There was clearly much more going on than just a sore wrist, so again I asked, "What is?" At first, nothing was very clear because the story in my mind was so loud and overwhelming, but repeatedly I brought myself back into the actual sensations of the present moment. I could feel the rage, the sense of injustice, the fear of my financial future. A piece of me wanted to revel in the experience of self-pity and righteous anger, but I had been aware too long to easily forget the price my body and heart pay for this level of chaos and confusion. With great compassion, I acknowledged that I was lost in a very contracted part of my story. Without judgment, I met each voice as it ricocheted throughout my body and screamed through my mind. With this spacious and focused attention, my body relaxed, my heart opened, and my mind calmed down. I moved from the victim stance into one of empowerment. I recognized that money will always come and go, and I chose not to let its abundance or its scarcity define my life. As I arrived home, I found again that I was in that centered place where clarity and wisdom abide, and where I felt deeply grateful to be alive. Asking what is brings our attention from the struggling mind engagement with the living moment. This not only connects us to life, but also allows us to see the story that takes us away. Freedom comes when we can bring the full light of our attention to this story. This art of seeing thought, rather than always trying to fix it, change it or rearrange it, is the doorway into the field of awareness that thought is flowing through the field of peace and joy we long for. Initially, this can be very scary. Many people have voiced the fear, but what will I be without all the stories in my head? That question is an indication of how long and far away we have traveled from a true connection with life. For what we will be is someone who has let go of struggling with life and instead knows how to trust it enough that we can stay in touch with the truth within us that knows how to respond to life, how to dance with it. Part 1, Chapter 4, I'm going to end here for now. Because, well, I was asking what is as I was reading this part of the chapter, and as these roosters behind me all started to gather, congregate, and become loud, they became the struggle in my mind, and yet I remained focused on what is. And what I was doing right then was reading. You know, I had one person at one point comment on one of my audiobook readings, and they said, "We love this, and this is a great book, by the way, but gosh, we really wish we didn't hear the roosters." Well, so, because, I'm not going to continue reading at this point. They're out of control. And yet, I'm also not going to stop before stop. Chapter 4, Part 1. Enjoy. I hope you enjoy.